Hello. As always, it is so great to see you. And yet again, I lament that I can't see you in actual person, but I know you're all out there. As we do say and have said for a while now, good morning, good afternoon, and good night. And I still get a thrill saying that because it means that I know we've got all of you tuning in from all different parts of the world, which is incredibly humbling and also super exciting, having shown up and doing this show, I think for now about 120 episodes or something like that, and it still hasn't got old. I think we're gaining momentum and we're talking to loads of amazing people. Now, for those of you who don't yet know me and who might be new to this community, welcome. My name is Alex Tullio. I'm the CEO of Financial Executive Women, and we've been showing up to showcase real-life role models and leaders from all across the globe, and we have some fantastic conversations about personal experience, work, life, you name it, we cover it. So welcome. It's so great to have you here. And for those of you who keep tuning in, you know it's so good to have you here as well. Now, today is no exception. I feel like I start every episode saying this, and it is for good reason, because we have some amazing leaders who come on this show and are happy to share and have a conversation. So without further ado, it is my absolute pleasure to introduce today's guest. Now, today's guest is the fabulous Cassandra Crowe. Now, with over 20 years of experience across financial services, Cassandra Crowe has worked internationally throughout her professional career and now resides in Sydney, Australia, where she serves as Vice President for Rowe Price, a global investment management firm. Cassandra is passionate about financial services and sees finance as a way to improve our communities in a range of forums, raising financial literacy standards, improving retirement outcomes, and promoting financial wellness. Cassandra values giving back to the industry and currently serves as a board director of the Chartered Financial Analyst, or CFA, Society Sydney, who seek to raise the standards of ethics, integrity and education. She's also a member of the CFA Australia Diversity Committee that works to create a more mindful and inclusive industry. Cassandra further serves as an advisor for a FinTech, Super Awards, which fuses technology and e-commerce to help bridge the gender superannuation gap, and is an executive founding director for the Australian and New Zealand Bloomberg Women's Buy-Side Network. Cassandra is a graduate of the Australian Institute of Company Directors, a CFA charter holder, and the recipient of a degree in economics from the University of Tasmania. However, her greatest achievement is her family and being mum to her 5-year-old daughter, Penny. Cassandra, welcome.
Thank you, Alex. And look, again, it's so wonderful to see you and to connect with you and to connect with few members as well. I really love the work that you're doing to kind of elevate women through the executive ranks. So thank you for the opportunity to connect today.
It's so great to have you here. And, I always reflect on what's brought us to, having a conversation and, the energy that we have around this topic. And, I wave my hands around with passion around inclusion and equality and fairness and diversity. And I know you really share this energy and passion as well, which I think is kind of what's led to us having multiple conversations and ending up here as well. So I'd love for you to share, if you're happy to, what generates the energy and passion in you around this topic?
Yeah, look, it's a beautiful question. I mean, there's the obvious answer, which is that clearly, we look in financial services and we do see it's not in balance in terms of, the groups that we represent. We don't see a lot of women in senior leadership positions. I think we all know that to be true and we speak of that. But for me, actually, it is a good question because it goes quite deeply personal for me. Something I know you and I have spoken about before, and I'm happy to share it in this forum. It's something I've been working on processing myself. But I grew up in an environment with a sister who was very disabled from a physical and a mental perspective. So maybe it's hard to put a label on that because she had so many issues. You actually can't. But to give you a bit of a perspective or a vision on that, she was unable to walk or move around, unable to see, unable to communicate or to feed herself. And so I guess as I get older, the more I think about, why do I have this energy to really kind of push for equality and why am I so deeply passionate about it? I think the real truth of it comes back to growing up in an environment where you recognize we're not all born equal. We don't all start at the same place. We don't all have the same opportunities, which is really sad and horrible to be aware of. But all we can do, I think, is take that awareness into something positive, if that's possible. And where we are so privileged to be able to have this conversation today, to be able to communicate, to move around, to have the very privileged roles that we do, I think where we can actually advocate for equality and more awareness and acceptance of that is something I think, really personal and close to my heart for obvious reasons. So I think that's where it comes from.
And thank you so much for sharing that, because as you all know, I get the privilege of chatting to our guests many, many times before we press record. And that is such a personal story. And I know, you said then as well, but, that it's taken you kind of only fairly recently for you to start kind of sharing that. That's a really personal story. But I think it adds such richness to everything else that we're going to talk about, and why, if we strip all that away, why you're so passionate and have so much energy around this. Because I think, what I heard, apart from, that's, it's really about bringing perspective about, the things we take for granted. And, it's easy to forget that some of the simple things that we are privileged to have that others don't have. And when I hear that, for me, I feel that in my gut, because it's more than it's more than gender and pay and yes, but at a deeper level, if we are really going to be inclusive of, as you say, and I know you celebrate equality and the fact that, we're all equal, but we start at different points. I think this is, it really strips back why I think, there's so much passion and energy around this. So thank you for sharing that. And I think that's a beautiful way to talk about the rest of the things we're going to talk about too. I want to jump in and ask you so many questions, but I think it's really great to celebrate a couple of things. I'd actually forgotten that you're on the board of Super Awards, and hello, shout out to the fabulous Pascal, because wow,
Absolutely.
what the role model and the work they're doing. And Pascal's actually been on the show a couple of times. That business is amazing. And of course, celebrating the connection that brought you and I together is one of our fabulous advisory board members as well, Julie Andrews, who first introduced us. So I think I always love to sort of call out these connections, because this is kind of the point, right? Like, they're people coming together. We've not met each other before, and here we are. So Cass, give us a bit of in your words, a bit of your I guess your pathway to what you're doing now. Is this what you dreamed of being when you were you were in your pennies age at 5? Like, yes, it's going to be this industry. How did you get here?
Look, my story, it's a bit of a funny one in that, when I was 5, I wasn't dreaming of being in financial services, as much as I absolutely adore it and think we have a huge opportunity to make impact. I think I was thinking about Lego and other things when I was 5. But what I would say and what I would share is, when I went to school in Tasmania, where I grew up, my high school and also our college, so year 11 and 12 there, my parents actually both taught at my school. So you can imagine what that would be like. Yeah, and between them, my mum and dad pretty much taught all the languages, so English and French. They taught religion, art, all the creative subjects they had really well covered. So I pretty much ended up studying maths, economics and business studies to avoid being taught by my parents at high school and college. So I think their love of education really drove me into this industry. And then I guess I went on to do an economics degree. I love economics because I think it's so practical and it's so relevant to everyday life. For example, if you bought a coffee this morning, the price of that coffee is really determined by demand and supply and economic factors. It's the same thing. We can't travel right now, but when you travel internationally and you convert your currency, economics is behind that. So I found economics was a really logical kind of area for me to study, and really relevant. And it has progressed so much since I was at university. We see behavioural economics now as a huge kind of trend that people are really talking about. We even see more progressive kinds of economics like donut economics. I'm not sure if you've heard of this, that's been socialised more recently, kind of looking at the image of a donut and really saying, well, if we're on the donut as a society, we're doing the right thing by the planet, we're not overshooting the planet, we're doing the right thing by our community and empowering our people. But if we're falling within the cracks of the donut, the reality is we're not really providing the right services for our community, so healthcare and welfare and the like. But if we're on the crust of the donut, we're overshooting the planet. So, that's just one very high level example of how I think economics is so relevant. That image of a donut is such a visual image. It's a very progressive way to think about, I guess, the world that we live in. So for me, economics was a natural passion. And then from that, I really needed to get a job. It was pretty simple. Ended up working in financial services, and 20 years on, I've worked in many different roles. I've worked on the technical side of the business as an analyst. I've also worked more on the strategy and client side. I've worked across Australia and also spent quite a bit of time in London working in Europe and the US. So for me, I'd wrap it up as I fell into it because my parents were teachers at my school, but it's been, a really beautiful journey. I love economics. I'm so happy I've been able to apply that in financial services. And while I'm 20 years in, I feel like I'm just beginning on my journey, to be honest.
I love that. And I have to say, that is a special kind of torture to have both your parents as teachers at your school, right? Like, I'd love to know if anyone else in our community had that. That's quite unique, but also wonderful on reflection, I'm sure. So what I want to ask you next, I want to ask you actually about financial services, because I think, I fell into this industry probably 25 years ago. I had no idea what financial services was at the time, right? Like, it was just this thing. Someone said you'd make a great business development manager. I didn't even know what that was.
Yeah.
But it's a fascinating industry, isn't it? Because I know you and I mean, we've talked and we will talk about loads of different things today. But just if you look at the industry, and I think the power of this industry and the breadth, I mean, we're talking everything from investment to economics to advice to superannuation. There are so many facets of an industry that I think is very important. What is it about the industry that you love? And I love that. Let's start at the donut economics. So already I've learned something this morning, and now have a carbs. So thank you. But I think this is really interesting about impact on the planet and how we think about the world that we live in, and how when you're thinking about financial services and the impact that it can have, this industry, on the planet and on how we live. Like, where does your mind go? I know that's a big question to start with, but I know this is a bit of a passion of yours as well.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I mean, I think if we step it back and kind of think about what is financial services as an industry, I think, to use your word of impact, really crystallizes it, that we have a huge opportunity to make impact across our community. And well, what does that really mean? If we think about what we're doing, at the end of the day, we're responsible for other people's capital. We're the custodian of other people's wealth. And that's a huge responsibility. And that means that we do have the genuine opportunity to really improve retirement opportunities for Australians and people in our community that we're fortunate to manage money for. And really, to distill that down, it's to build, I think, greater financial wellness. We know in Australia, we do have some challenges. Particularly in the retirement space, particularly for women who face some quite devastating outcomes at retirement, despite the super progressive superannuation system that we have. So I think, there's a lot of elements in there, but for me, I love the industry because it is a genuine industry that can make impact and positive change for our community. And that can come back to financial wellness, retirement, or it can also go in another direction that you're kind of touching on as well, around responsible investment. That's been a huge mega trend across the industry. I think particularly, post-COVID and post the bushfires that we saw in Australia, I've really felt a shift in terms of people wanting to be sure, and not only, mum and dad investors or advisors or institutional clients and super funds, but they want to know that when they're putting their capital to work, it's actually doing something good. And that can be for society or for the planet. They want to make a tangible impact there. I think really the impact can come from a kind of purposeful capitalism, investing responsibly, but also just improving financial wellness and retirement and financial literacy standards. I think I love it because, in my own little way, I feel like we can make a contribution to some of those things that really do matter.
And they're so important. And again, you reminded me, it was even in your bio, talking about financial wellness, because you're right. I mean, we're a very lucky, very affluent country. We know all this. And yet, as you've already alluded to, there are so many challenges that we have. And as you said, really impacting women and older women. It's like a lot of these things, isn't it? Talking about these challenges openly and not sort of glossing over them and then actually taking action. That's how we're actually going to change things and really raise awareness. So I think it's important. And I find it interesting as well, which I don't think I'd actually shared with you before we came on, but we obviously, from our community, we speak to loads and loads of professional women, from emerging leaders right through to C-suite, who are in this industry, extremely smart, extremely well educated, great careers, great salaries. And yet what quite a few of them are saying to me is, I'm actually worried about my financial future. I feel this nervousness about retiring and being independent. And I just, it always brings it back home to me that this is real. And I think, as we all know, there's so much M&A activity and movement and global pandemic and all these factors. So there is quite a lot of instability around people's jobs and all these sorts of things. Do you have conversations like this with any of your female friends? Like, is this a theme you're hearing more of?
Oh, absolutely. I think it is 100% a theme. I think, in school we don't really teach financial services. I mean, we teach maths, but we don't really train people to talk about their financial well-being. And I think women in particular, to your point, I know lots of amazing women who are quite embarrassed to talk about what it is that they earn or how they're investing their superannuation, or do they even know where their superannuation savings are, which sounds crazy, but I think we haven't really been trained to have those very open conversations, which can make it kind of awkward. And there's other just practical situations to this kind of fear of women in retirement. If we kind of think about some of the statistics there that you'll be familiar with, women retire, I think, with about 40% less superannuation than men at the moment. And if we look at women between 65 and 69, 55% of that cohort have zero superannuation. So women have a higher dependency on the age pension later in life and are in fact the fastest growing group of homelessness, which is why I think Pascal, who you mentioned, who's the leader of Super Awards, really working to engage women in their superannuation to have a better retirement is such an important thing. But, I think we need to be talking about our finances more. We also, we need to make women feel comfortable to have those conversations, because by the time they get to their 60s, it's too late to solve the problem. And that's why we're seeing this, pandemic of older women really facing really unfortunate situations. And I think it's also connected to women do a lot of the unpaid work. So if someone in the family is unwell, like a parent, I mean, it's a huge stereotype. You'll see women might take time out of their careers to care for that person. I have a 5-year-old daughter you mentioned. I took a year out of my role on maternity leave. My employer actually paid my superannuation through that time, which was amazing. But I was in a very fortunate position for that to happen. I know not all employers do that. But so, women, I guess, taking time out of the workforce for various reasons. Also, we know there is a pay gap in Australia, unfortunately, today, which is really upsetting to hear, but it is the state of play. That can all lead to women having less superannuation. And then when they come to retirement, they're not able to earn any more to save for that. So I think it's a very complex conversation, but we do need to be enabling women to engage in their finances, and to talk about it a little bit more to really help prevent the outcomes that we're seeing today.
Yeah, yes to all. And it is complex. But again, something you said there about, we've got to get comfortable having these uncomfortable conversations, and we're all a bit weird about money, right? Like we're all a bit weird about money. And I think, especially as we're sort of saying, when you think that you should know, because God, look at what I do for a job and I'm kind of in the industry, but it's the plumber with the leaky pipes thing.
Exactly.
So
yeah,
that's why, and I know you're the same. That's why I love having conversations like this are so important, because we need to go to different places. And that, if I say so myself, is a beautiful segue to you and I. We started talking. So when Julie introduced us on a number of different fronts, and I remember I was saying to you, we're really passionate about talking about diversity and inclusion. And this, what I want to talk to you about is this real, I guess, the notion that, it's broader than gender. And it's really interesting because from where Fuse came from, we're going as well, right? Like, it's absolutely about the positive progression of women. Hell yeah, no apology, absolutely. The evolution of that I feel really strongly about is that the modern approach to that is we've got to have men and women as part of the conversation. It's got to be a broader lens than gender, which doesn't make it any less important. But I think if we're serious about what we're trying to impact, what we want the ripple effect to be, like, what are we actually trying to do? So I know you're also really passionate about, let's talk about inclusion, let's talk about diversity, let's talk about cultures of belonging. So I'm hearing that a lot at the moment, but what does that mean? Because I think if we don't kind of tackle that, then I feel like we're always going to have the same conversation about pay gaps and not representing communities and, like, so you and I've talked a little bit about this behind the scene, but I'd love your thoughts and kind of go anywhere here about, when you inclusion, diversity, positive progression of women, where does your mind go and where do you reckon that we can have, a big impact?
I think it's really about equality for me. And I think, we have had some great conversations on this, and I love your whole attitude to it. And as I say, everything you do with you, I think, really is elevating the standard. But for me, I think it's just recognizing that we're all equal at the end of the day. So it's about equality. I think, there's diversity and inclusion, there's diversity, equity and inclusion. There's a whole lot of, lovely slogans that are thrown around. But at the end of the day, what does it really mean? And for me, it's about equality. It should not matter what your gender is or your race or your background. At the end of the day, we're all human. I think the issue is that, unfortunately, we don't all start from the same place. I think that is the issue that we face. And, one of the reasons why I'm always happy to share my view on this is, obviously, working in financial services, we need to represent the society that we serve. Now, there are a lot of minorities that are underrepresented in financial services, but one of the obvious ones that jumps out to me as a woman in the industry is clearly the gender issue. Like, CFA, you mentioned, I'm quite involved with them. They've done a wonderful research piece looking at, around the world in investment management firms, what percentage of, senior leadership roles, so CEO, CIO, CFO, are currently held by women, and it's 1 in 10. So I think that highlights that we clearly have an issue. We're out of balance when it comes to gender in financial services. It is a global challenge that we all face, and it's a real shame because I think we know the benefits are so clear. Companies do better when you have different people sitting around the table making decisions, and also it's just the right thing to do to represent our community. So I think it's about equality. Gender's an obvious one, but exactly the same as you, I think it's equality for all people, and it really shouldn't matter anyone's background, I think, is where we're kind of going to. And I hope that's where the conversation is elevating to.
Yeah, because, and I know they're big issues, aren't they? But we have to talk about them. And I think it's, it's similar in a way to what we were just talking about before about, financial and that kind of uncomfortable space. Like, if we don't talk about this stuff, then nothing ever changes. And I think it's all of this. So I know that you're super passionate about this piece of inclusion. I mean, how do you think when we're working for, whether it's a big corporate or our own business, when we have, and I think most people do have an intention to be inclusive and to be welcoming, like, I think most humans actually do intend that. What do you reckon, with all your experience and life experience and whatever, like, where do you think the block is? Like, why is it hard to go from saying we really have the right intention around a culture of belonging and a culture of inclusion, and yet the reality is still so far behind that? Like, what do you think it takes for us as leaders to change, to really start to speed this up in real time?
I think it's really hard to do. I think the reality of having a more, diverse, for want of a better word, team that you work with, it's actually really hard, because when people think differently, you're challenging one another. You're coming at it from a different place. If you want a team of people that all just agree with one another that this is the best path forward, that can be quite easy to manage. But when you're talking about genuine diversity across the spectrum working together, it is naturally a harder process to go through, but it's worth it because you end up with a much more considered and thoughtful outcome, which I think is better for everyone from the perspective of the business, the clients you serve, and just generally working with other people. So I don't think there's an easy answer, and I think that's why today we're still talking about this very known challenge. But I think the practical things that we can all do are, like today, actually call it out and own it and advocate for change and make people aware, because we do have unconscious biases. We all have them. And if we're not speaking about them and making sure that we're aware of them, we're never going to see change. So I think there's no easy answer to it. I would certainly say something that has helped me is that concept of role modeling. So I think if you can see someone, if I can see a woman in a senior leadership role, that really helps me feel that, in time I could do that too, or I could be that too. So I do think that see it and you'll believe it is a really powerful tool. So I think we do need to make sure that at the top we are demonstrating that kind of behaviour, because, the stat I shared earlier, clearly at the moment, if you look at senior leaders in the industry, often, if we imagine that, we think of a tall white man, and that's not because there aren't many amazing tall white men in those leadership positions. I work with a few of amazing men and I adore them. But the reality is, if that's what we see 9 times out of 10, that's what we then subconsciously think it takes to get into those positions. So I think it's hard, it's a challenge, being aware of it, talking about it, having a strategy in place, having a diverse candidate slate when you're hiring for new roles. All of those things really help to create a more diverse, talent pool at the top, which is where it really needs to go.
Which is, I think, why things that, as you say, we're massive believers in role modelling, and I think, great, because I'm going to turn the spotlight on you in a second, which you're going to love. But I think it, excuse me, I think it is role modelling, and I think it's really sharing the reality of what it takes. I don't know if you and I were chatting about this, or I was speaking to someone else who's a very senior woman as well, who's very open about sharing, it's not always easy. Like this whole notion, this easy kind of balance, no, that this is what it takes. And, here's the wins and here's the challenges. And I think you're the same. Like, I feel like sharing that is such an important part of being that role model, right? Because we, if we make it sound like it's all easy and, hey, I just did it like this, then I find that other women looking at us are going, oh, well, then why isn't it easy for me? What am I doing wrong? Like, I think this is really important, that we do talk loudly about the things that we celebrate and that we learn from, and the journey. So, and I'm half joking when I say turn the spotlight back on you. So you are an incredibly successful, incredibly senior woman who is doing some amazing things. And you are a role model to others. I know we always feel a bit weird about, oh no, it's just me. I'm not kind of doing it, but know that people will look at you and go, wow. How do you feel about being that role model? And maybe a bit more of your career journey around, what are some of the things where you go, gosh, that was a great learning point, or when I jumped in and just trusted my gut, or change it. Like, it doesn't matter what it is. I'd love to hear a bit more of your kind of journey from your career perspective.
Yeah, look, it's a good question. I think we do need to be vulnerable and open that, there is no perfect picture or scenario. We've all had failures or challenges in our career. I think that's part of how you grow, but it can feel like a weakness, I think, for women to share them. But I think your point is we actually need to share them if we are going to be realistic about what it takes. And, as I said, I'm 20 years into my career. I feel like I'm just beginning. I'm very much on a journey. Things I've done, I guess, that have been risks in my career. I moved to London. I didn't know anyone in London. And I moved to London because my grandparents were, British, so I could actually get access to working in London without a company having to sponsor me for a period of time. So I had a visa. And I just felt like growing up in Tasmania, beautiful place to live, but obviously very remote, isolated from, the bigger financial services market. that
Yep.
moving to London would be great for me personally, you know, to be around other cultures and to kind of see what I could do and, you know, to see if I could get some real international experience. So I think, you know, that was definitely a point of being vulnerable. I think when I moved to London, it took a couple of months even to get a recruiter to actually meet with me to then put me forward for a job. So that was a bit of a rude awakening, but I had no network, no contacts, very limited experience. I had a degree in economics from the University of Tasmania where no one really knew where that was. So I think, you know, it's not easy. There's still challenges I face today. And I guess the other thing that's popping into my head in answering this question, talking again about, you know, DE&I and inclusion, you know, we've had International Women's Day last month. There's a lot of talk, particularly I feel at this point in time, about what we're chatting about today, you know, empowering women. And there's been a lot of activity in the marketplace on this. And there's a lot of stuff coming out in the media. And obviously the political arena is pretty devastating at the moment. And I was saying to some of my colleagues the other day, I just feel really enraged at the moment as a woman, you know, as a woman in Australia in financial services, just observing all of this inequality makes me feel quite enraged. And that was a vulnerable thing to share, I think, across the team because, well, you know, it's quite an emotional statement to make firstly. And then it's, well, what do you do with that rage? And I think the important thing is to take that to a place of positive impact. But I think sharing what's really going on with us and how we're feeling is the best way I've found connect with people, to be human, and I guess to share a bit of vulnerability, because absolutely have a lot of that.
Yeah. And I love it. I think, you know, my reflection on having lots of these conversations is it's been an interesting journey as well for me, because you kind of show up and you have, you know, as I said to you before we went live, you know, they're very conversational. We kind of go on tangents. It's quite organic. And most of the guests on the show will always say, well, what's going to have the biggest impact on your audience? And this is a thing that I've learned from just having these conversations, is that we all take something from what we're sharing today, depending on where we're at. And I think it's that simple thing of even you saying, you know what, you know, there are times when I feel this rage. Like, yes, I feel,
Yeah.
but I love taking rage to positive impact. That's excellent frame, because it's what are we going to do about it? But I think, you know, that's the thing for me, is that us just chatting. And I made a promise. My intention this year was that I'd stop using the word just, because I find that when I use it often, it almost undermine or make something less than what it is. Oh, I just have conversations. Anyway, that's another tangent. I find it really interesting. So I think these conversations are really important, even if we don't feel like it's not that big a deal. And but I wanted to ask you as well, because, and again, you and I were chatting, and a lot of our amazing community, as always, I wish I could see you. I know you're all out there listening. I know I've been speaking to loads of you. There's so many people, and again, this has got nothing to do with title, age, pay grade, anything, right? It's across the board. And it is more women than men that are saying to me, you know what, the pandemic has shone a light on a lot of things for all of us. And for some of us, oh my God, what am I doing? Life's too short, or confusion or unknown. Like there's we're all on this journey. But a lot of our amazing members have been saying to us recently, I don't know what to do next, or I'm faced with a redundancy, or I think that I want to do something else, but who would have me? And when I say to them, well, okay, well, you know, what are you great at? What are your transferable skills? I get that classic, and this is something that really pushes my buttons, right? If I ever hear that stat again about, oh, you know, men will tick 7 out of 10 boxes and apply, and women, okay, yes.
Yeah.
But so what do we do about this? And I know, Cass, you and I were chatting about, you know, how do you, and I think you personally, I mean, clearly you do this, how do you own your expertise, your experience, your wisdom, your success, your brain power, without feeling like you're bragging? Because this is what our members are saying to me is, oh, but I don't want to blow my own trumpet. And they said, you know, you could do a project role. And I had this one amazing woman who obviously will remain nameless very recently say, you know, someone's approached me about a project manager role, but I've never done project manager training before. And so
Yeah.
we're in this amazing group, one of our circles, and we're saying, well, okay, talk to us a bit about, what you do. And she's like, strategy, people, finance, executive. Everyone else is sitting there going, hello, like, you've got all this amazing skills, but when it's us, it seems to be really hard to own it, which was your word.
Yeah.
How do you own it? How do you articulate it? How do you go, hell yeah, I'm great at this, and this can apply across a whole different range of scenarios? Give us your thoughts and maybe some tips around, how you own this.
Yeah, it's a great question. And when I've answered, I want to hear your answer as well, because I think you will have really insightful tips on this. But
you can't turn this back onto me. That's not how it works. Sure.
But I think it's so hard, and I'm sure men struggle with it as well, but I know women 100% do, because it's such a fine line between arrogance and confidence. And I really struggle with that. So I think the way to do it is to be really clear on what your skills are, and to use genuine factual examples that cannot be debated, because the facts are the facts. That's not bragging. If you've done something that's really contributed, you do have to own that and communicate that, but do it in a way that's very factual. But I think from the other perspective of employers, perhaps rather than as an individual, I think we need to be thinking about people's potential. Like you, I feel enraged, to use that word again, when people say women need, ultimately we're asking women to have the exact experience when they apply for a job, having done the job before. But for men, we seem very comfortable, as a massive generalization, to promote them into new roles without having seen them do it exactly the same before. And I hear that a lot about women, oh, she was great, she didn't have the exact experience. Well, why does she need to have the exact experience? If we talk about the skills that people bring, they're extremely transferable. We're talking about people's potential, their attitudes, their ability. Yes, what they've done in the past is most likely going to be some form of predictive power in terms of how they will do in the future. But equally, if we empower people and we can see and feel their potential and really harness that, I think great things can happen. So I think employers need to be much more open, I think, to put women forward in it's not even untested, but to look at their skills and not expect them to have exactly done the same role, just at another company or something, to promote them into it. I think that is a big headwind for women climbing the ladder and really getting into those C-suite roles. So I totally agree. But yeah, I think women, unfortunately, we do have to own it. And the way to do it without seeming arrogant, I think, is to keep it really factual around events that have actually happened, that you can correlate your influence to. But Alex, what do you think?
This is a new. Okay, and it is a good question. I think for me, because I've been there, and I don't know if you have as well, but I remember, which I recount quite openly, I remember, like, I was quite a long way into, like, I was in senior roles when I was still going, I don't really know what I do, but I know I get results, and, like, it was so vague, and I struggled to really articulate the thing I did. And to be honest with you, this is also where I'm so focused on picking myself up saying just, because even as recently as kind of the last year or so, and people are like, well, oh no, but you bring this and you do that. And I'm like, nah, I just have conversations and I just ask questions. And I could hear myself saying that, going, hang on a second. I know that some of the things I do, not everyone can do that. And I know that I do bring, some skill to things that I'm doing. So I think my insight is very much that it took me a long time, and different things for different people, right? But for me, what I found super, super helpful is getting someone else, people I trusted, to play back to me what they saw me doing when I was really in my zone. And, and this is back in my exec career, and it was such a great way to actually, because I think it's hard for us to talk about ourselves, right? So I think that's one thing. And through seeing myself through other people's eyes, people that I really trusted and respected who knew me in that, was a really great way. And I think the other thing as well is, as you say, we need to go, you know what, I did that, and make a note of it, so that you don't forget all the things that you've done, that the fact perspective. But I also think as well, and I'd love your thoughts. I reckon as we get wiser and older, but this sense of the importance of having a network of people around us that we trust, so important, because, and I do tie that to this conversation about owning what you're great at and being able to articulate what you do and the impact you have and why that's transferable. Because the more that we network with other smart, amazing people, the more we talk about that, the more we share that experience, the more we hear other people. And I think that really helps. And that's when you find, and I'm sure you've had people in your career, as I have had in mine, who saw the talent in me that I couldn't see and went, no, you're going to do that. And I think it's all part of building the confidence, and then you get the job. I remember my first sales role, I never wanted to lead teams, hilarious. But my first, when I went the transition from literally business development to leading a team, and I remember going, I wouldn't have the first clue about how to lead a team of people. But the boss at the time, and I was not going to, wasn't going to put myself up for the role, wasn't going to apply. And I was tapped on the shoulder like, you're applying. So I think it's all for me. And a lot of that, you can tell that's all lived experience of for me. But yeah, I think they're really important things to consider.
I love how you said asking people to play it back. I'm actually going to take that one. I think that's a really good way to put it, really good perspective.
And it's that, and I think, why that's so powerful is you don't just ask anyone, and you can do it with an email or a conversation, but it's literally just saying, Cass, when you see me and you think, my God, she's in her zone, what is it that I'm doing, right?
Yeah.
Like I'm a big one, zone of genius, when you just because it feels like nothing, because it's so natural and you're energized and all that sort of thing. And it's a really powerful, because you're not saying to someone, oh, can you tell me how great I am? You're saying, what are you seeing when you can tell I'm energized, engaged, having an impact? And it's easier when you hear it, I think, from other people. And then from that, you can go, oh, okay, well, actually, I do love doing that. So I find that really interesting.
Yeah, that's brilliant.
So I told you we were going to run out of time, and we are pretty much there. And I know we've covered for everyone. I mean, you're all used to this by now. We've covered everything from, Tasmania to school, to social impact, to diversity, to bring, we've talked about some big themes, but to sort of bring it together. I mean, what are some of the things that you just want to leave us with from your perspective? Is it, is there something around the role of financial services and social impact and responsible investing? Is it about your role as a woman? Is it any and all of the above? Like, what would you like to kind of end this conversation on?
Oh, look, I think we've gone so wide-ranging, but I think the main message for me would hark back to, I think, the essence of the conversation around equality and just that belief that, we're all equal. Unfortunately, we don't all start from the same place, but I think if we can make a contribution in any way to creating more equality, whether that be through our work in financial services, empowering people into senior leadership positions that, might be representing minorities but have all the talent to be there, or be it improving financial wellness or, retirement outcomes for women that we've spoken of. I think the main message for me is really that, harking back to, if we can just all be mindful and thoughtful and push for equality, I think good things will come. And I think we all have a responsibility as well to use our platform to do that.
Yeah. So good. Thank you so much, Cassandra Crowe, for joining us. It has been wide-ranging, but this is what I think makes these conversations so fun. And yeah, completely agree. And thank you for sharing your own story and being on here with us. I think it's super important and very much appreciated. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. As always, we love having you here. Don't be strangers. We'll see you for the next episode. Thanks again, Cass, and hopefully we'll see you again on the show at some point. See you soon.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you, Alex.